Capitol tonight one final time. 1 week from today, President Obama will address the nation and Congress to roll out a new jobs plan. For the past year, national unemployment has held steady at about 9%. However, here in New York, the numbers turn out to be better. And a new report by the Rockefeller Institute suggests that the job market in New York State has actually outperformed the rest of the nation over the past few years. It is curious. Bob Ward is the Deputy Director of the Rockefeller Institute. He is the author of this report. Thanks for joining me, Bob. It's good to see you. This is amazing to me because we hear so much about the beleaguered New York economy, the upstate economy that never recovered entirely from the manufacturing slump. The governors say it's about jobs, 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 and putting people back to work. And yet you guys have found that perhaps it's really not as bad as all that.
Well, we hear that because for half a century it has been true. From 1950 until the year 2000, in an average year, New York lost 200,000 jobs to the rest of the country compared to what we would have gained if we had matched the national pace. The second half of the 20th century was at a boom period for the American economy overall. New York also added jobs, but at a much slower pace.
Right.
So that's why we have this understanding that New York traditionally has underperformed the rest of the country badly. Over the last 4 years, however, it's been just the opposite. We've now had 4 straight years in which New York did better than the nation. 2007, we added jobs at a stronger pace than the nation. 2008, we had a small gain, the nation went down. 2009, the depth of the Great Recession, the nation went down by well over 5%. Our loss was much smaller than that. In 2010, we had a small gain while the nation was still losing. So
okay.
Again, these 4 straight years, something of a man bites dog story here in New York.
Right.
And we're still trying to figure out why that is the case.
You attribute it in part, at least slightly, to the fact that we did not suffer as greatly in the mortgage crisis as some other places did. Not to suggest that folks who have a problem and are facing foreclosure are not actually really suffering. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about, in a very straight statistical comparison, right, not thinking of the personal cases, New York versus other locations, we actually did not fare as badly.
That's right. Housing is a very important part of the overall economy. It affects the number of construction jobs very directly, for example. California, Florida, and a number of other states had real sharp spikes in their housing values and construction levels going back 5 to 8 years or so. New York did not have that much of a run-up. We didn't have the big bubble, so we did not go down as much. So over the last 4 years, that's been a gain for us in relative terms. We still have, you know, as you referred to, we still have some significant problems in housing, but compared to the rest of the country, we are not doing as badly.
This is a little bit of a glass half full versus glass half empty situation, right? It depends on how you look at the numbers and what your personal experience is. Also, I want to ask you about this other report. You know, you have another think tank that is labor-based, or labor-backed, I should say, Fiscal Policy Institute, says that New York's real, quote-unquote, unemployment rate is actually close to 15%, which is considerably higher than that national average. I mean, the argument is that people lack full-time jobs, they're only sort of underemployed, if you will, or they just stopped looking and they're no longer reporting. I mean, what do you say about that?
Well, I think that's no doubt true, and it is true across the country. Probably less so here in New York because, again, we have not been hit as hard as the rest of the country. Over the last 4 years, although we have not done as badly as the nation as a whole, we have lost 90,000 jobs here in New York. But again, when we look at the long-term picture, New York is always going to be one player within a very large national and, in fact, global economy. So the fact that we have been outperforming the nation is good news. The question is what happens going forward. And I think one thing that will influence that is to what extent are we actually examining and benchmarking our performance. And I think it's very encouraging to see that the governor's approach to economic development requires every individual region to establish their own benchmarks and measure their performance over time. I think that will help produce some good results.
Right, and the governor also has changed or tweaked the economic development process to cause regions to actually compete for money that would perhaps just been given out in the past in grant form. We don't know now what Irene is going to sort of throw a wrench into this works because the state obviously has, as the governor said, about $1 billion cleanup bill. Some of it will be federal. The counties have to pick up some point share of that, although they don't want to, and the state, so it's unclear how that all works out in the end in terms of jobs. Do you believe, and there's a lot of argument about this, that a natural disaster can actually turn out to be a stimulus?
Well, I think for New York, if we are getting, let's say, $1 billion in federal assistance, I don't know that it will be that much, but whatever amount we get from Washington is a net gain compared to what we would have had otherwise. So some folks will be able to rebuild. The state will clearly be rebuilding the roads that have been washed away. That will create construction jobs. I don't think there's any question, on the other hand, that we will lose some things. There will be some elements, some historic aspects of these upstate communities that are gone forever. That's a loss. A number of people will find it very difficult to put their lives back together. So we already know that the Federal Reserve, for instance, says we're going to have 2 more years of slow economic growth nationally, possibly even descending into another recession. So we probably do have some troubled days ahead. And I think the more we can understand why we are where we are and what we are doing relative to other states, the better off we'll be.
Well, and also when you spend money on recovery, you're not spending money on other things. In a personal matter, if you're spending money to rebuild your house, you're probably not eating out, you're not going to the movies, you're not spending discretionary income,
Certainly.
which is bad for sort of that not hard economy, if you will, the people who don't, not the non-Lowses of the world, right? You're probably not going to museums either. I just wanted to say you are going to be following this up because it's unclear exactly what has caused the New York miracle this time around.
It's tough to figure out what's going on in the economy at any time, and I think with the turbulence that we've had over the last few years, it's especially difficult now. So yes, we will certainly be continuing to look at this.
Okay. Do you have a timeline for that?
Well, we're actually thinking about a conference later this fall where we bring together economists from around the state to talk about what is going on in New York's economy, how are we doing compared to other states, what are the good factors, the growth factors in New York, and how do we build on them.
Okay. Well, if in fact you do that, we of course will cover it. I want to thank you in the meantime
Very
for
good.
coming to see us. Bob Ward, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.